Hey, travel creators, welcome back to another episode. I'm Laura, and if you've never tuned in before, I'm a content developer for travel creators and influencers, and I basically take the overwhelm out of travel content creation. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the difference between what the heck is a travel writer versus a travel creator, and if you are one, you probably know, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what the heck makes good travel writing with Daniel and how we can use those tips in our content creation. For context, Daniel is a travel writer and has written for a lot of things under the sun, and probably a lot that you've heard of, such as Nat Geo, BBC Travel, Rough Guides. He is also working on his first book, which is all about festivals, and that is so exciting. Congrats, Daniel. But when he graduated from university, he started working for a travel agency as a copywriter. And at the time, he was sitting there writing about all these amazing places, staring out at the shitty London weather. So he started writing for Rough Guides, and his manager hit him with a, "What do you do in the next couple of months?" And the next thing we know, Daniel's off to Indonesia to collect info for a Rough Guides guidebook. And the rest, as they say, is history. What do you feel like makes good travel writing? Let's say you're reading something somebody else has written and you're like, this is a good piece of travel writing, or this is missing the mark for me.
Okay, it's a good question. I mean, and it is a complicated question, like you say. I think to give you the sort of get the thorny side of it out of the way first, I think it depends what you mean by travel writing. In my career, I've written guidebooks, and I've written articles, and now I'm writing a book, and it is kind of, they're all travel writing, but like your definition for what would be good, what makes a guidebook good is accurate information, being concise and clear, and yeah, occasionally being very readable, obviously entertaining, but then obviously it becomes very different when you write an article. You can be a bit more, or a book, be more, a bit more poetic and writerly and stuff like that. So, but I'll focus on that side of it because you mentioned the art of travel writing, what I look for in what I would read. I think for me, ultimately, it's storytelling really, and a lot of the same kind of techniques I think that make a novel or fiction really readable. It also makes travel writing really readable. So like having a little bit of just the right amount of peril in there, interesting characters is probably the most interesting thing, I think, is people, the voices from the people that you meet. And yeah, I think having some kind of thesis, like setting out to answer a question, you don't necessarily have to have a theory that you're trying to prove or whatever, but I think basically writing that kind of angles towards trying to get to the bottom of a certain kind of question or a certain issue. I mean, there's a whole like endless swathe of travel writing, which is just, I went here from A to B and on this adventure and I enjoyed it. And this is why I enjoyed it. And, they can be really fun to read and well written and stuff. But I think, for me, it's better to have something where you're really examining a question. Mm-hmm. So for example, I really love a travel writer called Pico Iyer, who writes a lot about...
I'm obsessed with him.
Okay.
Love.
Yeah, he's great. And his the thing I like about his books is that they tend to be thematic rather than like just what I did on a trip. So like his first book is called Video Night in Kathmandu, as you probably know. And it's sort of examining like how Western, and it's like a trip through Asia, or each chapter is based on a different kind of trip or leg of a trip through Asia. But looking at how not only has Western culture like colonized that part of the world, but also how they'd interacted, how it's been like a two-way street and obviously only culturally speaking. But yeah, it's just really interesting. I'm looking at how films and music and language and stuff interact between East and West, for want of a better expression. So I think like just stuff like that, when it's like you're setting out to answer a question, is really interesting. I love Paul Theroux because I'm reading Deep South by Paul Theroux right now.
Oh boy.
His American books you may have read. And people kind of often say about Paul Theroux that he's misanthropic and he's curmudgeonly and stuff like that. But I think he's just honest, and he portrays in great depth his conversations with people and stuff. There's so much dialogue in his books. And so it's not going to be overwhelmingly positive, the things that people say and stuff. It's just like in Deep South, he wants to go to the Deep South to find out the reality of how people, live there, and all the the same issues of racism and inequality and stuff like that, which still exist there. And so I think in travel writing, you have this weird kind of duality between there's like what I would call like proper travel writing like that, where you're not afraid to paint a picture that isn't overwhelmingly positive. And then there's the industry side of it, which I also engage with completely. Like when you're writing for magazines and stuff, most of the time your trips are being paid for by a tourist board or a tour operator. And so you can still absolutely do good writing within that framework, but you're unlikely to be really looking under the skin of a place in the same way if you're there as a guest of the place, effectively. So there's kind of like, there's like holiday writing, which is like inspiring people to go on their vacations or whatever, which is all well and good. And it's a very nice way to make a living and all that. But I think if you're talking about what makes great travel writing as an art, I think it's, stuff that really tries to get under the skin of a place and tell a story particularly about the people who live there.
If you're listening to this, there is a really big chance that you are location independent or have been traveling for a very long period of time. And if you want to get into reading true travel writing, and I don't just mean like 10 Instagram spots in London, I mean writing sort of reflecting on travel, I would highly recommend starting with Pico Iyer. I love his style of writing. It's easy to read. Let me read you this tiny little excerpt from his essay called The Nowhere Man. It was only recently, in fact, that I realized that I am an example, perhaps, of an entirely new breed of people, a transcontinental tribe of wanderers that is multiplying as fast as international telephone lines and frequent flyer programs. We are the transit loungers forever heading to the departure gate. We buy our interests duty-free, we eat our food on plastic plates, and we watch the world through borrowed headphones. We pass through countries as though revolving doors, resident aliens of the world, impermanent residents of nowhere. Nothing is strange to us and nowhere is foreign. We are visitors, even in our own homes. I'm sure your storytelling abilities have just grown so much since, if you think back to the very first time you started writing for travel writing.
I hope so, anyway.
No, I'm sure. What do you feel like, if anything, helped you become a better storyteller? And maybe it was, I'm sure in some cases, it might have been traveling to that place to meet those local people to try and understand what it's really like. But is there anything you can think of that kind of helped you become a better storyteller in your writing?
I think definitely just on a practical level, it's being in the mindset. Because when you're first starting out, for me anyway, when I was first starting out, I was like, you're trying to scrabble together like a portfolio and you're thinking like, oh, I went to this place. Maybe I could write an article about that trip that I did 5 years ago, or whatever. And of course you can do that. But I think for me, you really have to do sort of good travel writing. You have to go somewhere with the idea that I'm writing about this place, because you're in a completely different, for me, anyway, completely different mode of travel. Like, you have to be taking notes and you have to be talking to people and recording what they say. And you have to be seeking out, like I say, it's good to have a kind of consistent train of thought, what it is you're trying to do. And so you're going to be trying to meet certain types of people or visit certain types of places in order to explore this side of a place, of a culture or whatever. So I personally think it's very difficult to, unless, you're writing some sort of memoir, like later in life, whatever, about your adventures. I think good travel writing is different from that because it's so granular and in depth. And if you're going to be somewhere for a few days and write an article about it, you have to talk to a lot of people, write a lot of stuff down.
Yeah.
Be aware of the fact that you're probably not going to use most of it. But then, so, I think you have to be in that frame of mind first and foremost. Mm-hmm. But also I think you do learn as you go on kind of how to approach people, how to frame what it is that you're doing. I mean, it's easier, obviously, if you're established, and particularly if you have a commission from a well-known magazine or something.
Yeah.
It's going to be very easy in some ways you have an excuse to send an email to someone and say, look, would you mind if we meet and we talk about this stuff? Because I'm doing this. It's much more difficult. I found it more difficult when I was writing my book, even being a bit established. When I was writing my book and before I got my book deal, and I was, in some cases, just having to say to people, look, I'm writing a book. I don't know if it's going to come out. I don't know who's going to publish it. I don't know when it's going to come out. Would you mind talking to me? And,
Right.
for the
People are
most
like,
part,
I want to be in a book, or I want you to
people,
write about me.
yeah, so that obviously opens a lot of doors. But yeah, but on that, you just have to be persistent and obviously in the right way. You have to be respectful and everything. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's about being professional, being honest. And when you read travel writing, because it's all portrayed as just someone lands in a place and then all these amazing things happen to them and they meet all these amazing characters organically. And of course, it doesn't necessarily happen like that, but they don't include the bits where they are asking people if they can introduce them to someone and what they're waiting around in a hotel and they're texting people, they're trying to message people on Facebook who they're not friends with to see if they can get hold of them and because they've heard about them, they want to meet them, whatever. All this stuff, a huge amount of the job is making these connections with people. And yeah, so you just get better at it really. And really when it comes to storytelling, I know that was your question. Of course, you get a sense, and again, it depends if you're writing an article or a book chapter or whatever, but you get a sense for the shape of how something should look at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And so I go back to these techniques people use in fiction writing. I think you follow the same route, even though it's subconscious a lot of the time. But yeah, really, it's about getting the characters in, I think. And you do just learn. I think it's about confidence. You build up the confidence in the end to be like, because it's unnatural, right, to go up to someone and say, can we talk about this thing? Because I'm writing a book or an article. But it's an inhibition you have to lose, basically.
So as a travel creator, if you are trying to work with more brands or tourism boards or whatever, honestly, in some ways, it's just a numbers game because the more that you pitch, the more likely you're going to get some sort of response to somebody. So I would really take the time to practice pitching. And by that, I mean, let's say you write a draft of maybe it's a cold pitch via email and don't send that out to like 100 people. Don't send that out to 100 brands or tourism boards or whatever that you really want to work with. Start by sending that out to 10. And then you can see, okay, did people respond? What can I edit about this pitch? What should I have changed differently instead? So cold pitching is always going to be a evolving sort of digital sport. But the more you practice it, the better you get. And we just have to remember there are people, humans, reading your email on the other side of the screen. So keeping it short, concise, and just trying to connect with that person rather than saying, give me the thing that I want, is going to go a lot farther. Okay, also, when you're going to cold pitch, leave out your personal narrative, okay? Nobody necessarily cares all of the countries that you have visited or been to. The brand or tourism board or whatever just wants to know how you can help them. They don't really need your backstory. So if you read through it, try and put yourself in the perspective of somebody who has never met you and think about, is my personal story in this pitch really going to make the difference? Is it really adding any value to what I can provide from them? Or is it just added fluff to make me seem like I'm awesome? Which I'm sure you are, but you know what I mean. How do you feel like, one, does that bother you that like all these personal anecdotes can come into travel writing that is more, it has a specific goal. The goal might be, let's create a guide on London, yet there's so much personal anecdote in it. Does that give strength to the writing because it's, hey, I went here and I had a good time or a bad time? Or do you think it's more effective, I suppose, if the goal is just to create a great guide about London to exclude your own personal narrative in that experience? Does it even matter? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I guess there's no easy answer, but I think it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it depends, really. I mean, like,
Yeah,
if
no.
you're someone who's really, really watchable, say you're a YouTuber or something, and you're just like really, really funny, and your videos are kind of like a vehicle for your personality. It's about servicing your strengths, really. So I agree with you. I think, you mentioned recipes and stuff that like go on, and I think the content and stuff, I can't really speak to it because I'm not like a blogger or a social media person so much. But I think if all you're trying to do is do stuff to get up the SEO rankings or whatever, then it's kind of a different thing. It's not really about the storytelling and what have you. Equally, there are some people who they think that they should be a big kind of character in the story, and actually it's not that entertaining or that interesting. But that's true. That's true of writers as much as it's true of influencers and bloggers, I think. I think the best writers obviously have their own voice, and sometimes they're big characters in the stories and sometimes they're not at all. in terms of like journalists, you think of someone like Hunter Thompson or like John Ronson or people like that, even Louis Theroux, not a writer, but it's like gonzo journalism, right? So they're like a central character in the story. I really love that sort of thing when it's done well. But then equally, like these, you get like more traditional writers, I don't know, like Gay Talese and people like that, who are just like complete fly on the wall in the way that traditionally journalists
Yeah.
were. And they're just observing stuff. And there's an argument to say, if you're describing something absolutely amazing that you saw in your travels, it doesn't really matter. Like how it made you feel is a little bit academic in that instance.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, some writing is completely brought alive by the voice of the writer and their interaction with the way they bounce off other people in the story. So I think it's not a neat answer, but I think it depends is the answer to that one.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. I think you're so right. It depends on what people's strengths are as well. Or let's say it's somebody who is an established YouTuber. They probably have a great personality on camera, and people are going to watch them whether they go to London or they go to Rome, because it doesn't really matter because they're showing up for them and maybe not necessarily the best guide to London, which is interesting.
Yeah. I actually think as well, one of the problems with social media is that I think everyone feels as if they have to be a certain way if they're doing stuff to camera or whatever. They have to be like this big, loud, like bubbly personality, like addressing the viewer directly and stuff. But actually, I would like to imagine a world where things could do really well on social media that are just presented without comment. You don't have to have someone being like obnoxious and sticking a microphone in people's faces or whatever. But obviously, the algorithm rules, doesn't it, with social media?
Yeah, that's so interesting.
People chase what they think is going to, rather than just trying to create stuff of quality.
When's the last time you created a piece of content because you genuinely were excited about it versus creating a piece of content because that's what's trending and that's what the algorithm likes? Think about that for a second. If you've ever noticed, the people who are most successful on social media are the people who are really showing their true colors in a way that is their choice, meaning they're not taking you into their bathroom to do their nighttime routine. They have very clear boundaries on what they share online and what they don't. And when they do share, it's opening up to let their audience see what they're really like so you can get to know them. Essentially, what I'm saying is trendy content can be amazing and fun to create, but are we really creating for a machine or are we really creating for other people?
The whole idea of stuff trending is a bit like inherently a bit sad because it's like people are only going to be doing stuff to fit a certain idea of what they think is going to do well, rather than just like thinking like I'm a writer with my own voice and I want to write like this, and then the world can come to it if they want it. Social media, you're chasing a dragon all the time, and so it can demean people a little bit depending on how you look at it. Yeah. So that's the challenge we all face with social media because we have to use it. But
I know I will always scream about how I don't love trendy content just because, for so many reasons. It's attracting people to you, sure, but it's not attracting the right people. It's attracting all these random people. They're not really there because they care about your travel writing or not. They're there because you posted something funny that everybody else is posting.
Yeah.
It's also if you post one trendy thing and then you don't do anything on social media for months or weeks, all people are going to think you're dead because they go to your profile and it's this trend from forever ago and it doesn't matter. I love that perspective of people do trendy content, because I always think of it as people are doing trendy content because, one, it's easy and they're trying to do it because they feel like everybody else is doing it. But it's really interesting to think about that people are doing it because they feel as though they have to, which I'm always like, please don't waste your time. The time that you spend putting together this stupid thing could be spent in better ways, creating far fewer pieces of content that are actually better. But
yeah, I agree.
I could talk about it all day. Okay. Switching gears a little bit. Advice that you might have for somebody who wants to create contacts in the travel space. What was your experience like, or what would you advise someone to do? Let's say they're at the beginning of their travel writing journey, or just, I guess maybe even just travel bloggers who are not as amazing as you are at what you do. And they're like, I want to just talk to more people in the travel space. What do I do?
I think I can only speak to my experience. So when I started out, I genuinely had absolutely zero contacts whatsoever in the travel industry, media. I trained as a journalist, but I trained in like news journalism. So I didn't know anyone who was doing travel journalism. Didn't get put in touch with anyone. Went and got this job at a travel agency, which again is like completely different side of a travel world.
Yeah.
So the way I did it was literally and people think it would never work, but like I went on the websites of the places that loads of travel places, and just filled in their little, whatever it is, like a form or contact us, go to the generic email address, and people think it would never get read. But if you do it enough, right, it really is persistence and just having this kind of pig-headed approach to it where after a while, because at first you spend hours like crafting a pitch, then you send it off, and then you sit there and worry about whether you check your emails every 10 minutes to see if they've replied or whatever. And then very quickly you learn that you just do it and then you forget about it. And you don't take it personally if you don't get a reply, because it's not personal. It's just the way that editors are very busy and stuff. But so, yeah, in answer to your question, I think figure out what it is you want to do first and foremost. If you want to be a blogger, obviously focus on that. If you want to write for magazines, if you want to write guidebooks, whatever, just target those organizations, those companies. Try and figure out who the editors are. It's pretty standard advice, but if you want to write for a certain magazine, read the magazine first and foremost, familiarize yourself with it, and then pitch for certain sections of the magazine. And it will say who the editors are and like the masthead of the magazine. So target your emails to them, because it's always better to, if you can, email a real person. But yeah, don't be afraid to send to those generic email addresses on the website as well, because that's how I started out, and it did work for me. But I'm conscious I haven't actually talked about meeting anyone yet. But the reason for that is, I mean, in my case, it took me so long. I was doing stuff for editors. There's still some editors I've been working with for years, and I've never actually met them, which I don't think is common probably for lots of remote workers and freelancers and stuff. But it took me a long time to get to the point where I was starting to get invited to events and stuff. I was on, because in travel media, most of the events tend to be kind of held by PR companies or like tourist boards. And so, yeah, if you're writing for magazines, then if that's what you want to do, I would say Google travel PR companies and ask to be put on their mailing lists probably. And you may regret that, because you end up getting so many emails.
Create a separate email account for this.
Maybe. Yeah, that's actually good advice, which I haven't done. But yeah, and just learn to play the game a little bit, which is PRs do great in that space, the travel industry. Like, we couldn't do it without them really, because they join all the dots and they are so good at making introductions, and also obviously putting the press trips on a lot of the time. So yeah, that's what PRs are there to be, your intermediary. If you're a writer or a blogger or a photographer or whatever, between them and either the destination or the tourist board. So make contacts with PRs, I would say, is probably the quickest way to meet people, because you'll get invited to events, and or they'll want to meet you for coffee or whatever. They're very like forthcoming sort of people for the most part. Say yes to everything would be my advice.
A question I have is, have you ever, let's say you've written a guide about London, and just keep using that because that's what we're talking about, and now you're writing a guide on Southern England. Have you ever repurposed tips or places or whatever that you've written about in one, let's just say guide for now, into another? Or is that like something you would never do? Is that like a sin? I don't know.
No, I mean, so sometimes, for example, with rough guides, I've written rough guides to certain areas, like a whole guidebook to Liverpool I wrote, and a whole guidebook to the Northeast. And then I also was updating those chapters for the rough guide to England, which is like obviously a nationwide guide. And so within that, sometimes they will say that they'll be happy to reuse content as long as it's still relevant and up to date.
Got it.
So I think if you get the green light from them, obviously it's fine to do that. You don't want to give yourself like unnecessary extra work unless you get paid more for it. And of course, like just in terms of reusing knowledge and stuff is fine. But I wouldn't, I would be wary of when it's actually different publications. I certainly wouldn't be copying and pasting.
Yes.
Even if it's your own stuff, because they might, when it's a competitor, like a guidebook or something, they might not be very pleased about that. But a lot of the time, the art of writing as a professional is you're finding different ways to write effectively the same thing. Hopefully you're not doing it too much because you want variety, obviously, but part of the skill of writing about any subject is when you're doing it all day, every day for a job, invariably, sometimes you'll be asked to write like an online article about somewhere that you've also written an article about in a magazine or whatever. And yeah, of course, you're going to if you have some expertise, you're going to use that, but it's just about writing it in a different way. And writing it, I mean, part of the, when you get commissioned to write something for a publication, they normally have like a certain style and stuff. So it would be different anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite assignment or that you get most excited about? Maybe you love writing guides more than you love writing, I don't know, something else. Do you have a favorite thing to write about?
So for me, I tend not to really do guides very much anymore. It would be really, obviously, my kind of baby over the last couple of years has been my book.
Yeah.
So there's that. But in terms of articles, I mean, I love I've just been to Iceland, for example, for Nat Geo Traveler, and it's for the longest thing they have in the magazine, which is like a destination feature, like 3,000 words. And you can really get your teeth into it. And it's much more in line with the sort of writing that I love to do, which is about being somewhere, going on adventures, meeting people and learning about a place and about a culture and stuff or a landscape, rather than just having practical information. It doesn't excite me as much. So yeah, in terms of articles, but really, it's doing my book, and hopefully there'll be more books in future, but that stuff would be the thing I'm most excited about, I would say.
When can we purchase your book?
So it's not actually coming out for 18 months or so. So it will be early 2026.
I'm excited. How was it trying to find a publisher? Do you feel like it was hard? Because I'm feeling like, okay, if somebody wanted to find a publisher who is not like well known in this travel space or in any sort of writing space, I wonder if it's harder for them than it might have been for somebody who has more credibility.
Maybe. I think the fact that I've been writing for magazines and stuff for a few years now probably helped, because I had a portfolio of stuff and it was relevant to the book. But I was still kind of conscious of the fact that publishers still treat you, unless you're like really high profile, they still treat you as first time author, which is what you are, right? But it's because they're taking a punt on you, really, because it's a risk, because the book might not sell very well. Yeah, they still will treat you like a first time author, which is understandable. But I guess it probably helps having a background in writing. Yeah.
Did it take you a long time to find a publisher?
Yeah, it did take quite a long time. Yeah, I think the first thing was that I found an agent, which took a while, months rather than weeks. But I think it's really hard to know, because obviously when you're doing it for the first time, I don't have anything to compare it to. So there's probably some people who try for years to find an agent and never find one, or to find a publisher. So I'm wary of sounding as if I'm ungrateful or complaining about it, which I'm not. But yeah, it took. I'm trying to remember how long it took, but I think it was less than a year. But between like pitching to agents and then getting a publishing deal. But I think it was probably, I don't know, 9 months or so, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. In my mind, trying to publish a book we know that writing a book is hard, but I think the nitty gritty of publishing it sounds worse, sounds harder than writing the book.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just seems like so many hoops to jump through and such a long process and time. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think it's for me, it was like the feeling of having so long after getting the deal before it's going to come out was like, I don't know how to describe it really. It was cool because it's I have a long time to get it ready and stuff. And obviously that's just the way the industry works. But it was also like, oh wow, like you realize things aren't just going to change. You have to just go back to what I was doing before, which was I enjoy and was great. But it's a labor of love, put it that way.
Off the top of your head, what do you feel like is the craziest travel story you've written?
I think I wrote an article which was partly about it for Nat Geo Traveler, which is about a festival in Thailand, in Phuket, which is called the Phuket Vegetarian Festival, which sounds quite like sedate. It's just vegetarianism. It's actually a very intense, so it's a religious festival. It was originally Taoists from China who started it in the 19th century. And they were on tour. It was like they were musicians. They were on tour in Phuket.
Yeah.
And there was a cholera epidemic. And they decided that in order to protect themselves from the epidemic, they needed to do their religious practices from back home, which included quite extreme, included eating vegetarian food, hence the name, but also quite extreme acts of like self mortification. So I think originally it was just piercing with like skewers and stuff, which they still do. But over the years, it's evolved. So now basically the festival is 9 days, and it's these huge processions every day of these people. They're called masong, they're spirit mediums basically, and they are getting like a trance, and then they give themselves other people give them these very elaborate facial kind of piercings, which vary from just skewers to really extreme things like swords through their cheeks. And people like some nowadays do stuff like there's a guy with a lamp through his face and like a bike frame through his face. Just crazy stuff, right? Like really
Holy
extreme.
cow.
And they do that, and then they also do other kind of self mortification stuff like fire walking and climbing on like ladders with knives in the rungs.
Nope. I bet this was awesome to witness.
Yeah, and participate. I mean, obviously, I didn't do the.
What did they stick through your face?
No, thankfully nothing. But you have to be on guard because I was walking like in the procession, and they're in a trance. They don't know what's going on.
Are they like hypnotized?
They're not hypnotized by anyone else. They would tell you that they're possessed by by their god, their deity.
Okay,
we could examine obviously what's really going on, or if there's anything else is going on. But it's really interesting from that kind of psychological point of view.
No kidding.
Like trance states like that, because they do it with no anesthetic. I saw them do it in the temple. They just literally sit there and they're in a trance. They like shake. It's very hard to understand because there's no anesthetic. There's not really any blood either, weirdly. And then they don't even flinch. They're getting swords put through their faces and stuff. And then you have all the other stuff that you get in a lot of kind of festivals of Chinese origin, so loads of fireworks, firecrackers, and dragons and all that stuff. It's an amazing thing.
And it hasn't been renamed from this vegetarian festival. It sounds like it needs a new name.
They also call it the Nine Emperor Gods Festival, which is the 9 Emperor Gods, about the main gods in Taoism. But yeah, vegetarian festival is very much a name for it as well. Yeah, so it's probably, I'd say that was quite recently. That was like last October. I went to that.
How did you hear about it?
Just in the course of researching my book, I wanted to do a chapter about food festivals.
And then little did you know what you were getting.
Yeah, exactly. So it seemed like a very interesting, and obviously to an extent, when you're doing something like this, you pick examples that are very like eye-catching and stuff. But also I was wary of, I didn't want to just do a kind of thing that perhaps a certain type of influencer might do, which is just the world's craziest festivals or whatever. To me, they had to be examples that I could look at and then say, what does this tell us about why we do this? What seems like very extreme behavior, but actually when you look at more of them, you realize that every culture in the world does these extreme things. Definitely in the UK, we have some
the cheese rolling. Ones. It's the cheese rolling for me.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I've had the privilege of attending that one year.
I thought you were going to tell me you were a cheese roller.
I was not a cheese roller. No, I was being that fly on the wall we talked about. But yeah, that happens near to where I grew up, actually, southwest England.
It's come to my attention that not everyone listening might know what cheese rolling is, so I would love to tell you. So basically in southwest England, in Gloucester, there is a cheese rolling event held every single year, and it is quite literally what it sounds like. So this massive round circle of cheese is rolled down a hill, okay? And it doesn't end there. And people then start rolling down the hill after the cheese to try and catch it. So the first person across the finish line is the winner, and their prize is the cheese. So as you can imagine, the cheese is rolling down the hill, and it is picking up speed quickly. So most of the time, people don't catch it because its velocity is insane. I would highly encourage you to look up YouTube videos of a cheese rolling. Okay, I just had to look it up quickly for you. Top speeds recorded at this cheese rolling event is 70 miles an hour. I'm just going to leave you with that. I'm just going to leave you with that and your ability to access the internet to Google that.
Yeah, those eccentric kind of events, there's something very British about them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think going back to what you said at the beginning, what makes good travel writing, I think one thing that makes bad travel writing, it's exoticizing everything, having that gaze of just, which lots of older travel writing has, which is like, oh, look at these funny, weird things that these people do that are different from me. I say that aware of the fact I just described something as weird, but it's fine to have that because it does seem weird to us. But I think that's fine as long as you have the awareness that we all do weird things.
Totally.
As humans, we should celebrate these cultural variety, but also look at it in a curious way, which is humanistic and says like, what does this tell us about the similarities between us rather than the differences?
Yeah.
And I think festivals are really an interesting subject area for that because they kind of reveal stuff about human nature and human culture in particular, and they're just very vivid examples of it. So yeah, but in answer to your question, I'll go with the Phuket Vegetarian Festival. It's probably one of the craziest travel experiences.
Cannot wait to read all of these stories. I'm setting my calendar, 18 months. I'll reach out to you and be like, Daniel, send me the link.
Yeah, I will do. Absolutely.
I can't wait. That's amazing. Do you have anything else you'd just like to get off your chest about travel writing or any annoying things happen in travel writing? Anything you feel like I'm going to say this and I'm going to feel good that I say this and I had my piece?
The thing that springs to mind is I want to tell people you don't need to say how many countries you've been to in your bio or whatever. You can do it. No offense if that's what if you
that is
do that.
So funny.
But because I think it's not a competition. And also there's like, I consider myself relatively well traveled, but there's also like huge areas of the world and continents that I've never been to.
For sure.
And that's okay, I think, because it's about, for me, like travel should be like a kind of deep experience. And it's not about ticking off how many countries you've been to. And in my experience, it's the people who want to have that approach to traveling, trying racing to get to every country in the world, whatever, it's like they're going to be less concerned with having a deep experience, which is beneficial for the local people in that country, a good exchange of ideas and experiences and stuff. Just take your time. That's what I would say. Slow travel is the way to go, really. But yeah, you don't need to be showing off how many countries you've been to.
That blows my mind. I have literally so many thoughts about this, and even that sort of country tracker people put in their bio, whatever, is in some ways a form of like, I am similar to what we're talking about, how people might observe traveling to this festival. Okay, it's like crazy to us, something we've literally never experienced before, nothing similar. In similar ways, I'm just checking off this country. I just went here. Cool. It's done now. Whereas you're being put on a pedestal of one, not to get all philosophical, but like being able to travel is just such a privilege. And so just saying, oh, I just went to this country and this country, it's, whoa, don't put yourself on a pedestal on accident that you have been to all these places. But like, where did you go? Okay, we went to Italy, we went to Milan. I was there for 2 days. It was pouring rain. I was inside the whole time. I don't know anything about Milan. Like,
how many Italians did you speak to?
Yeah, exactly. I ate a cannoli. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And that,
when people say we did Italy, we did Spain, just because you went to Madrid or wherever, even if you just went to a little village, you haven't done the country. You haven't ticked off. I haven't done the UK, and I've traveled around a lot of the UK. The world's a big old place, and you don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it's like a double-edged sword too, because I know a lot of people who do the argument of, oh, especially in the US, if I've been to this airport, I've been to this place, because I am someone who doesn't have the luxury of traveling a lot. And so it's such a double-edged sword of, I haven't been to a lot of places, and so the short time I'm spending here, I'm going to say that I have, versus the reverse of, I have been to the US. I mean, I lived here my whole life. I haven't been anywhere. And I think it really depends on your goals, I think, of traveling. Because if your goal is to just move quickly and check off a bunch of places and go there, great, fine. But to have, I think, the most memorable experience, I think everybody's most memorable travel experiences are when they find themselves in bad situations. Or just, wow, this really unfortunate thing happened to me, and here's what I had to do. Those kinds of moments happen when you spend sometimes longer periods of time in places. Not always, but I think that's when you get the best stories.
Mm.
And especially if you are using your travel to inform other people of how to travel there, or using it for content or any sort of writing, the
Mm.
longer you can spend in that place, or the more intentional time, if you don't have a lot of physical time, will really make a difference.
Yeah, and I think having a reason to go somewhere is nice. It's obviously like easier if you're a travel writer or
Yeah.
whatever. But I think aimless travel can be great, obviously, and fun. But I think, I don't know, deciding what it is you want to, like, why do you want to go to Spain? What is it about Spain that you want to, rather than just because you want to have been there?
Right.
I just think travel's not a competition, right? You get a lot of, I meet a lot, unfortunately, a lot of people who, in my line of work, who try and be a bit competitive about it sometimes, like not really travel writers,
Hmm.
but sometimes if you meet someone in another country who's also traveling there, who maybe is a traveler and enjoys traveling,
Yeah.
if they find out you're a travel writer, they'll be like, "Oh, so have you been to
Yeah.
Papua New Guinea?" And I'll
I
say
feel
no,
like,
and they'll be like, "Oh," and they want to like try and outdo you.
yeah.
And
Yes.
loads of people would win that argument because there's loads of places I haven't been to, but I just think it's not about that. It's like travel, like you say, is a privilege, and I think, particularly in this day and age where we're more aware of the damage that travel does
Mhm.
to the environment and things like that, I think you have to treat it with a bit more respect. Don't get me wrong, I have a large carbon footprint because of my job,
Yeah.
but I still think you need to treat it with the respect that it deserves and
It's
not be
so
aggressive.
interesting. I feel that all the time. People try and one up you on the places you've been. Or
Yeah.
they're like, oh, like how many countries did you go to when you were visiting X, Y, and Z? And it's, yeah, I was there, but I wasn't there for very long.
Mhm.
This is what happened to me. But that I think is a constant battle of people trying to make you feel, I don't know what they're trying to make you feel, but they're trying to one up you on your travel experience. And we have to remember that any sort of travel you're trying to share about is like community based, really. The reality
Mhm.
is, we're trying to read the guides that you're writing, or the articles you're writing, or the whatever, because we're trying to learn about a place.
Mhm.
And we can only do that from people who have been there before or have lived there, can share about it.
Mhm.
And it's really a community, whether however you're sharing about it, online or whatever, is all community based. And I think that's lost so much in this little tiny competitive nature that we never really talk about.
Mm. And also, it discourages people from going back to the same places again, which is
Yeah.
a shame because you can't go somewhere once and claim to know the place really at all.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I've just been back to Granada for Nat Geo for, I don't know, maybe the third time or fourth time.
Yeah.
Not for them every time, but I've been there a few times. And you not only do you discover new things about a place every time you go, but it also allows you to travel in a deeper way. Because I've been there before, I didn't feel this pressure to go to the Alhambra and go to the big tourist sites because I did that the
Yeah.
first time I went there. They're amazing, but I was there for a different reason, which is to discover about a certain side of the city's culture and stuff. So I was free to do that then, and
Right.
and I wasn't spending loads of time getting lost and wondering where I was going and stuff. I knew it a bit better. I'm still by no means an expert, and there'd be people out there who'd say, "Why didn't they just send someone who's from Granada or lives nearby?" And that's a valid argument. But I think you need to, when you find places you like, surely you want to go back there rather
Absolutely.
than go, I need to add another country to my list.
I know. The feeling of being like visiting somewhere and knowing where you're going is the best feeling ever. Is the
Mm.
best feeling ever. Or I just I'm such a foodie. And so looking forward to, oh my gosh, I remember that this place was so good and we had
Mhm.
this. And looking forward to going back and experiencing that again is the best, rather than breaking out my Google Maps. I'm really a terrible planner. I just show up places and I'm like, I'll figure it out,
Yeah.
which is not good and not doing anybody any justice. But I'm there and then I'm opening my Google Maps and I'm like, okay, what's nearby, or this is what I'm craving. Let's see if we can find it. So I guess don't take any travel advice from me.
I think it's a good way to travel. I think obviously be like, it's better to, if you're going to do background reading and stuff, I'd say it's better to read around the place, read histories of it
Yeah.
or novels set there even or whatever, like rather than trying to read every guide that's out there to get clued up on the best restaurants, whatever. Because at the end of the day, that's just someone else's opinion anyway. You know, you want
Right.
to
That's true. That's
make your
true.
own way when you get to places. And the joy of it half the time is going, this place is busy with locals and it looks Just try it.
Yeah, that is the best.
And you're more likely to speak to people. And
Yeah. I feel like a really bad travel writer because of this one thing. So I mentioned I'm writing YouTube scripts for every country in the world. And at the bottom section, and this was not necessarily like a script format that was put together by me. So I'm just executing the research and the writing. But the last piece of it is three things like you can't miss in this country. One, I have a hard time writing about the country as a whole just because it's so massive, and who am I to do it justice to write about it, especially for the places I haven't been. And I'm just trusting people on the internet to tell me. But the last section is three things from this country you can't miss. And so oftentimes I just spend my time researching other travel guides or blogs that are, here's like the best things to do in, I don't even know. The last country I think I did Denmark recently. And for some of the tinier countries, that's a lot easier. But I always feel like, especially being someone who is on the other side of the travel writing experience, I have such a new perspective because I'm like, I am somebody who is ghostwriting this as somebody else who has a large influence. And now from my perspective as a consumer of content, I take it with a grain of salt because I'm like, did they really write it? Who really knows? They might have just gone on the internet and grabbed these three best things. And so now I have such a different perspective of, is this even any decent advice? I don't even know.
Yeah.
From the ways that we gather it.
That's the effect, I think, again, of the internet, isn't it? It's imperative to churn out content all the time. Means you end up with stuff that is just recycled.
It's hard. It's hard to pick. It's just me deciding what the best thing to do in this country is. And I'm like, I have no business deciding that for this, but here I am picking, hope it's a good one, tried my best.
The weird concept, isn't it? Like, top things to do in a whole country. I guess you have to think of it again as separating kind of the tourist experience is like one thing, isn't it? And then it's really, when we say that, it's like these are the things that as a tourist to the country, you're most likely to want to within that tourist industry.
I should really reframe this headline, but I try and always make one of them do something local. So maybe it was like Italy. It's okay, go on a self-guided food tour or something like that. So it immerses. So it's not just like, go visit this cathedral.
Yeah.
Okay. It's okay, try and learn a little bit about where you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a new perspective of information I consume from creators on the internet because I'm like, did you really write that? Because here I am, just a random person at a random desk writing about telling you where you should go.
Back in the day, obviously, like everything that was in whatever it was, a guidebook or an article, kind of would be much more likely to have been researched in the flesh. I think nowadays that's why it's nice to. That's why I like doing this stuff. Like I said, those big destination features, because it's a first person story of like you have to have been there and done it to write it. So it's proper travel writing in that sense.
That was awesome. I feel like there's so many good bits of information in this episode that I can't wait for people to hear. Right. And amazing. Where do you want people to find you on the internet?
Okay, you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is @DanStabs, DANSTADS. My website is danielstables.co.uk. And most of my articles, all the good ones anyway, are on there. And I'm on X as well, or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I don't tend to really use that too much these days, but you can find me on there as well. Yeah.
Amazing. I am so excited. I just want to know, side note, are you a photographer? Why are your Instagram photos so good? Are you?
Oh, that's very kind of you. The answer is no, I'm not. I'm certainly not a professional photographer, but I'm trying to get better at photography because I do like it a lot. And I feel I'm very lucky to travel a lot and go to these amazing places. So it seems a shame to not try and get good photos of them. I'm a bit shy with it. Like if I'm traveling with a photographer, which I often am, like for Nat Geo especially, and obviously they're amazing photographers. So right. I quite often leave my camera at home for those ones and let them deal with that. But I learn from them a lot. Yeah. So photography is a hobby of mine, I'd say. But
amazing. You already have emails of people at Nat Geo. You can say, hey.
That's true. I'm not sure how pleased the photographers would be about that.
It was my childhood dream to be a National Geographic photographer. That's no longer a dream, but I think it might have been a little bit of everybody's. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Daniel. There's so much good insight here that I think you can come back to, especially if you are tweaking your pitch to brands, tourism boards, maybe even magazines, whatever, or if you are wanting to start doing that. If you love this episode as much as I did, please give it a little Google review and come let me know what you think on Instagram at Travel Content Writing. I seriously love hearing from my listeners. Also, thank you again for the highest download month of the podcast. That is insane. We just keep breaking these little imaginary goals. So I appreciate you for listening. Thanks so much. Don't forget to have a happy time creating, and I'll see you next week.